My parents chose my ex-husband over me the day the divorce papers were finalized. They told me I was throwing away the best thing that ever happened to me. Right after he admitted to draining our life savings on a series of failed business ideas he never told me about. I'm Amelia. I'm 32. And that was the moment I stopped thinking of them as my parents and started thinking of them as his. It was the beginning of the end, but it was also the beginning of me. For as long as I can remember, I was the reliable one, the quiet one, the one who fixed things. When my younger brother's car broke down in college, I was the one who drove 3 hours with my toolkit to get it running again. When my mom's small catering business was on the verge of collapse, I was the one who spent my nights and weekends redesigning her website, setting up her accounting software, and managing her social media for free, until she was back in the black. I was the family's silent infrastructure, the unseen support beam holding everything up. Nobody ever acknowledged it because a good support beam doesn't creak. It just holds the weight. I carried that role into my marriage with Mark. When we met, he was all charm and big dreams. He painted pictures of a future filled with adventure and success. And I, the practical one, was supposed to be the steady ground his ladder could rest on. I believed in him. So while he networked and chased opportunities, I worked my steady, unglamorous job as a data analyst. My salary paid our mortgage. It covered our bills. It funded his startup ideas, the artisanal hot sauce company, the subscription box for dog bow ties, the app that was supposed to be the Uber for lawn care. Each one fizzled out, and each time I'd quietly absorb the loss, telling myself that the next one would be it. I was investing in our future, I thought. I didn't see that I was the only one investing. My parents, Carol and Richard, absolutely adored him. Mark was the son they never had, my father would say, clapping him on the back at family barbecues. My own brother, a quiet mechanic like me, was usually overlooked. Mark could do no wrong. He'd bring my mother her favorite flowers and listen intently as my father recounted old high school football stories for the 100th time. They saw his charisma as confidence, his recklessness as ambition. They saw my pragmatism as a lack of faith in my husband. "You need to support him, Amelia," my mother would tell me over the phone, her voice laced with disappointment. A man needs his wife to believe in him. Their adoration for him created a strange dynamic. They would call him to check in, not me. They'd invite him over for dinner when I was working late. When I'd try to gently explain the financial strain we were under, they'd get defensive on his behalf. My father once told me, "It takes money to make money, honey. You can't be afraid to take risks." It was easy for him to say. He wasn't the one staring at a bank account that was bleeding out month after month. The truth is, my parents were financially precarious themselves. My father had been forced into early retirement, and my mother's catering gigs were inconsistent. But I made sure they were okay. I set up an automatic transfer to their account every month, a gift, I told them, to help with bills. A few years ago, when they were on the verge of losing their house, I drained a personal inheritance from my grandmother and paid off a huge chunk of their mortgage. I never told them the full amount. I just told them I helped out. I didn't want them to feel embarrassed. I just wanted them to be secure. The quiet support beam doing its job. The breaking point didn't happen in a lawyer's office or during a screaming match. It happened over a plate of my mother's dry pot roast. It was a Sunday, 2 weeks after Mark had moved out. The divorce was proceeding, and it was messy. I had just discovered the full extent of his financial betrayal. A second credit card in my name, loans taken out against our shared assets. I was reeling, heartbroken and terrified. I went to my parents' house for dinner, craving the one thing I thought I could count on: comfort. The air in the house was thick and strange. My mother's movements were stiff as she set the table, avoiding my eyes. My father sat in his recliner, flipping through channels, his jaw tight. The smell of overcooked vegetables hung in the air, a scent I usually associated with home. But now it just smelled like decay. I tried to talk, to explain how much debt Mark had put us in, how he had lied to me for years. My voice was shaky, my hands trembling as I held my fork. My mother just sighed, placing the gravy boat on the table with a sharp clink. "There are two sides to every story, Amelia," she said, her voice cool and distant. Before I could even process that, the doorbell rang. My father got up a little too quickly. I heard his booming voice in the hallway, a laugh I hadn't heard all evening. And then I heard Mark's voice, smooth as ever, responding. He walked into the dining room holding a bottle of expensive wine, a sheepish, charming grin on his face. He looked right at me, then at my parents. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. My blood ran cold. I stared at my mother. "You invited him?" I whispered. "We just want to hear his side," she said, fussing with the napkins. "It's only fair." I felt the floor drop out from under me. I was the guest here. The defendant. He was the guest of honor. He sat down right across from me, and my parents treated him like a returning hero. My father poured him a generous glass of wine. My mother passed him the biggest piece of roast. They asked him how he was holding up. They listened, nodding with sympathy, as he spun a tale of a misunderstood visionary, held back by a wife who was too cautious, too afraid of success. He didn't mention the debt. He didn't mention the lies. He painted me as the anchor holding him down. And they believed him. Every word. The final blow came from my father. I was sitting there mute, a scream caught in my throat, when he looked at Mark and then at me. His face was a mask of profound disappointment, and it was all directed at me. "You know, Mark," he said, raising his glass, "your ambition, your drive, you're more of a son to me than my own kids. Amelia could have learned a thing or two from you about chasing a dream instead of just paying the bills." The sound in the room vanished. All I could hear was a high-pitched ringing in my ears. Chasing a dream instead of just paying the bills. The bills? The bills I paid. The mortgage I paid. The debt I was now drowning in. The chunk of their mortgage I had paid off. The monthly transfers that kept their lights on. The room started to spin. I looked at Mark's triumphant smirk. I looked at my mother's nodding approval. I looked at my father's smug, righteous face. And in that one crystal-clear, devastating moment, the support beam didn't just creak. It shattered into a million pieces. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping violently against the hardwood floor. I didn't say a word. I walked out the front door, leaving the sound of their confused calls behind me. And I didn't look back. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and hot tears. I cried until my throat was raw, until my head pounded with the kind of grief you feel at a funeral. I was mourning the loss of my marriage, yes, but that was a dull ache compared to the sharp, searing pain of losing my family. I had been their daughter, their fixer, their safety net, and they had thrown me away for a charismatic con man because his story was more exciting than my quiet, dependable love. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a long time, the engine off, the silence of my empty garage pressing in on me. The crying stopped. The shaking subsided. And in its place, something else began to grow. It was a cold, hard feeling in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was rage. But it was a quiet rage. A focused rage. The kind of rage that doesn't scream and break things. The kind of rage that builds things. I went inside, walked past the boxes of Mark's things he still hadn't collected, and went straight to my home office. I sat down, turned on my computer, and opened a blank spreadsheet. For years, my life had been about managing other people's chaos, my parents' finances, Mark's business failures. I had spreadsheets for everything, budgets and balance sheets and projections. It was my secret language, the one place where I had complete control. But this spreadsheet was different. This wasn't about them. This was for me. I created 2 columns. The first was titled Tethers. The second, Scissors. Under Tethers, I began to list every single thing that tied me to this life, this town, this pain. My job, the house, my joint accounts with Mark, my phone number, and at the very bottom, I wrote Mom and Dad. Then I started filling in the Scissors column. Next to each tether, I started to outline a plan. A precise, methodical plan to cut it. It was no longer a question of if I would leave. It was a question of how, and how I could ensure I would never, ever be in this position again. The quiet protagonist of everyone else's story was finally about to write her own. My first call wasn't to a moving company. It was to my lawyer. Not just about the divorce, but about my parents. I explained the situation with their mortgage. I had the bank statements, the wire transfer confirmations, every piece of documentation proving that the substantial payment came directly from my inheritance account, an account that was legally mine and mine alone, shielded from the marital assets Mark was trying to claim. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Albright, listened patiently. She confirmed that while the payment was a gift, the documentation of it was a powerful piece of leverage. It wasn't about getting the money back. It was about proving a truth they had refused to see. For the next 6 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was the same quiet Amelia at work, methodically closing out my projects, earning my final paycheck. But by night, I was a general planning a silent invasion of my own future. I went through years of financial records, printing every statement, every transfer, every receipt. I found the emails where I'd gently tried to warn my mother about Mark's spending. I found the text messages where my father told me to stop nagging him. I wasn't just collecting data. I was building a case for my own sanity, a case for my own worth. Simultaneously, I started my escape. My job as a data analyst was fully remote even before it was fashionable. My company had offices all over the country. I had always been praised for my efficiency and my ability to manage complex systems from afar. My family saw it as a boring desk job. They had no idea that my specific skill set, analyzing risk and optimizing systems, was in high demand. I put out feelers for an internal transfer. Not to a nearby city. I pulled up a map and looked for the furthest possible point within the continental United States. Seattle, a city of rain and coffee and tech, thousands of miles away from the sun-baked suburbs of my past. A place where no one knew my name. I applied for a senior analyst position there, a promotion I was more than qualified for but had never pursued because it would have meant disrupting Mark's life. Within 2 weeks, I had an offer, a significant raise, a relocation package. It was real. The logistics became my obsession. I hired a cross-country moving company, scheduling them for a specific date. I found a small apartment online in a Seattle neighborhood called Ballard and signed a lease without ever setting foot inside. I opened a new bank account at a national bank with no branches in my hometown. I methodically transferred my own funds, separating my finances with surgical precision. Each step was a quiet act of rebellion. Each confirmation email was a small taste of freedom. I was building a new life, one encrypted file and one packed box at a time. The house, which was in my name from before the marriage, was the biggest piece. I listed it with a real estate agent, pricing it to sell fast. The market was hot. I had an offer within days. Everything was falling into place. I planned one final visit to my parents' house. Not for a fight. Not for a tearful goodbye. For a reckoning. I called my mother and told her I needed to come over to discuss some final financial matters related to the divorce. Her voice was cautious, but the mention of money got her attention. I asked if both she and my father would be there. She confirmed they would. I didn't tell her that I had also sent a text to Mark from my soon-to-be deactivated phone number. A simple, calculated message. I'm at my parents' house to discuss the division of assets. You might want to be here. I knew his greed, and his fear of being left out would be enough to bring him running. I walked into their house for the last time, not with a suitcase, but with a thin, black portfolio. They were all there, just as I had planned. My parents sat on the sofa, their faces a mixture of apprehension and self-righteousness. Mark was pacing by the fireplace, trying to look casual, but his eyes were sharp and predatory. He was there to protect his interests, to make sure his favorite in-laws didn't get cheated by their ungrateful daughter. I didn't sit down. I walked to the coffee table and opened the portfolio. Inside wasn't a jumble of papers. It was a neat tabbed presentation. I had spent a week preparing it. My work as a data analyst was all about making complex information clear and undeniable. This was the most important presentation of my life. I won't take up much of your time, I said, my voice steady and calm, a voice they had never heard from me before. I just wanted to clarify a few things before I go. I laid the first page on the table. It was a summary of my net income for the past 10 years. Beside it, a summary of Mark's, which was mostly zeros and negative numbers from his failed ventures. Mark started to bluster. Now that's not fair. We were building a future. I'm not talking to you, Mark, I said without looking at him. My eyes were on my parents. I'm talking to them. I laid down the next page. It was a detailed breakdown of all the household expenses for the past 7 years of my marriage. Mortgage payments, utilities, insurance, groceries. Highlighted in yellow were the payments made from my personal bank account. It was a sea of yellow. Highlighted in pink were the payments from our joint account, which my salary funded. The page was almost entirely yellow and pink. Then I moved to the next tab. This is for you, I said to my parents. I laid out the bank statement showing the 5-figure wire transfer from my grandmother's inheritance account directly to their mortgage lender. I had the exact date, the exact amount. Beside it, I placed a copy of their mortgage statement from the month before and the month after. The principal balance had dropped by nearly a third. My mother gasped. My father leaned forward, snatching the paper off the table. He stared at it, his face turning a blotchy red. What is this? He stammered. That's the day I saved your house, I said calmly. You were 3 months from foreclosure. I didn't want you to worry. I continued. The next page was a spreadsheet documenting every single monthly gift I had sent them for the past 4 years. The total was at the bottom in a large, bold font. It was a staggering number. That, I said, pointing to the total, is what your comfort has cost me. Silence. The thick, suffocating silence of a truth that can no longer be denied. My mother was pale, her hand over her mouth. My father was staring at the numbers, his face slack with disbelief. Mark looked like he had been slapped. You told me I should have learned from Mark about chasing a dream instead of just paying the bills, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, looking directly at my father. These are the bills I was paying. My bills. His bills. And your bills. I was the family's financial plan. The one you never bothered to read. I let that hang in the air for a moment. You chose him, I said, my voice finally cracking, but with strength, not sorrow. You called him the son you never had. So, congratulations. He's all yours now. I gestured to Mark, who was frozen in place. The monthly transfers to your account have been canceled, effective immediately. I assume your new son will be happy to take them over. And since he's so good at chasing dreams, I'm sure he'll have no problem helping you with the rest of that mortgage. With that, I closed the portfolio. My house is sold. My job has been transferred. Everything I own is on a truck to Seattle. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. This is the last time you will ever see me. The dam broke. My mother started sobbing, not for me, but for the life that had just been yanked out from under her. Amelia, no, you can't, she cried, reaching for me. We didn't know. It was my job to fix things quietly, I replied, stepping back from her touch. It was your job to love me anyway. You failed. My father finally found his voice, a weak, sputtering version of his usual boom. This is your family. You don't just walk away from your family. You taught me how, I said, looking at Mark. You showed me that when someone is a liability, you cut them loose. You just chose the wrong person. I walked to the door. Mark, finally snapping out of his shock, blocked my path. Amelia, wait. We can talk about this. Don't be so dramatic. I looked him straight in the eye. The divorce settlement is what it is. My lawyer will be in touch about your things. But you and I have nothing left to talk about. Ever. I stepped around him and walked out the door, not with a scrape, but with a clean, silent click as it shut behind me. I didn't run. I walked calmly to my car and drove away, the rearview mirror empty of anyone chasing after me. The silence in my car was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The next morning, I dropped my old phone into a public trash can at a gas station 3 states away. I unwrapped a brand new one I'd bought weeks earlier, turned it on, and let it connect to the network. A new number. A clean slate. The only people who had it were my brother, my lawyer, and my new boss in Seattle. The silence was absolute. No guilt-ridden voicemails. No angry texts. No desperate pleas. Just peace. My new life began in a small, 1-bedroom apartment overlooking a canal. I watched boats pass by instead of worrying about stock market tickers for Mark's latest venture. I drank coffee on my tiny balcony and read books, uninterrupted. My new job was challenging and fulfilling. My colleagues respected my skills. My boss valued my insights. I was no longer the quiet infrastructure. I was the architect. For the first time, I was recognized not for what I did for others, but for who I was and what I knew. About 6 months after I left, I got a call from my brother. His voice was hesitant. He told me he'd driven by our parents' house. There was a foreclosure sign in the yard. He said Dad had been calling him, leaving angry, rambling messages, blaming me, blaming Mark, blaming the world. Mark, he'd heard, had disappeared a month after I left. Apparently, the pressure of being the new son without the accompanying bank account was too much for him. He'd packed a bag and left in the middle of the night, leaving my parents to face the financial fallout alone. My brother told me Mom had called him, crying, asking for my new number. He told her he didn't have it. I knew he was lying to protect me, and I loved him for it. He asked if I was okay, if I was happy. And for the first time in a decade, I could answer without hesitation. I am, I told him. I really am. There was no triumph in their downfall, only a quiet, sad confirmation that I had done the right thing. Their house of cards, built on my sacrifice and their delusion, had finally collapsed without its support beam. And I was 2,000 miles away, building a new foundation, one that was all my own. It's been 2 years now. Seattle is home. I've made friends. I've been promoted. I've even started dating again, cautiously, but with a newfound clarity about what I deserve. I no longer live my life in service of other people's dreams. I'm finally chasing my own. My quietness is no longer a sign of subservience. It's a sign of strength. It's the calm at the center of a life I built myself, from the ground up. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that final scene in their living room. The spreadsheets, the shocked faces, the satisfying click of the door. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. I was reclaiming my money, my time, my future, and my own story. I spent so long being the dutiful daughter, the supportive wife, bending myself into whatever shape they needed me to be. I thought that was love, but it wasn't. It was erasure. The most painful betrayals often come from the people who are supposed to be our safe harbor. They count on our love, our loyalty, our silence. They take and take, assuming the well will never run dry. But everyone has a breaking point. Mine just happened to be at a dinner table, over a plate of dry pot roast. Walking away from my family was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But choosing myself was the easiest. Setting that boundary wasn't selfish. It was an act of survival. Your value doesn't decrease based on someone else's inability to see your worth. Sometimes, you have to be the one to show them what your absence costs. If you've ever been underestimated, undervalued, or betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your story matters, and your strength is greater than you know.